Hey guys, Eric here with Bridge Watches. Thought I'd put together a short little video about one of the many aspects of custom dial making that I deal with. Depending on the dial design, one of the things that we may end up doing, depending on what the client is looking for or what I'm doing if I'm just making my own custom dial, is I will paint the dial. That is normally done through airbrush and usually with an acrylic, a water-based acrylic. Sometimes I might use an enamel or some sort of lacquer based paint, but more often than not, it's just an acrylic, water-based acrylic airbrush. And after painting, there's a sanding stage that I go through. So this video is going to talk about what I do to sand a dial, the things that I use to do that, and hopefully it'll be entertaining. Might give you some insight if you decide to try making your own dials, how you might go about sanding them. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments or reach out. Always happy to discuss. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Thanks. All right, so this is the actual work. I'm doing this in the kitchen because I normally use wet dry sandpaper, which you can see there. That's a 1000 grit 3M wet dry sandpaper. But I usually do it right there on the kitchen counter next to the sink. I'm showing some of the items that I use here besides the 3M sandpaper. There's also a 12 by 12 granite slab that you can see me doing the work on. I use that because it's pretty much guaranteed to be flat and level. I actually use it for watch strap making, but it works really well for actually sanding the dials. I've got I think it's a 40 millimeter by 40 millimeter by 40 millimeter steel bench block cube, and I'll explain that one in just a moment. I've got some 3M Scotch removable double-sided tape that I use. And basically what you can see me doing here is putting a couple strands of tape down on the bench block. And then what I'm going to do is attach the actual dial onto that bench block. The double-sided tape is going to hold it in place. The reason I do this is the bench block provides a nice even surface with some weight to it for the dial. So the double-sided tape will stick the dial onto the bench block. When I turn it over to actually do the sanding, the block itself is heavy enough that it presses down a little bit on the dial. I don't have to press down. All I have to do is basically just drag the bench block along the sandpaper, and it'll be a nice consistent sanding across that flat surface. I've tried doing it with just my fingers in the past, but fingers, for whatever reason, I never quite seem to get the pressure right. Sometimes I'll take a little bit more off one side or something along those lines. So I prefer to just use the bench block and just pull it along and let the weight of that bench block actually press down on the dial. So here you can see after a couple passes, it's already started to take the paint off of the dial. And basically what's happening here is the dial's been engraved or ablated. A section has basically been cut out of it for all intents and purposes. And then the indices, the lettering, the logos, those are all left untouched. So they're basically a raised section on the dial. So what I do is I go with the airbrush the whole thing, and then come back and sand it. And the sanding takes off the paint on those raised sections, but it leaves the paint in the engraved section. So it basically gives you that kind of background color to it. So sorry about getting my arm in the way, but I just have to move it around to keep the sandpaper in place. This time I'm doing dry sanding as opposed to wet sanding, but sometimes I'll do either or. Wet sanding works a little bit better in some cases. In this case, dry sanding is working just fine. But there you can see the paint comes off really well on the raised sections. You just don't want to sand too much because, I mean, we're talking tens of millimeters here as far as how those indices are raised. It's not super tall. The dial itself, this one is actually 0.5 millimeter thick aluminum. So just a couple swipes with that bench block, and that does enough to pull that paint off and gives a really nice finish of the aluminum, the exposed aluminum, and then that background paint color. And what I'll do when I'm finished here, which I don't actually show on the video, but what I'll do is then take it back to the spray paint booth or the airbrush booth, and I'll apply a top coat to it, or a sealer coat to it, either a satin or a gloss sealer, just to make sure that everything is good and taken care of. So I'll just leave it here. I think that's the end of what I've got here. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, again, just drop them in the comments.